ABC Kinderteach presents A Bad Case of Stripes, written by David Shannon. Camilla Cream loved lima beans, but she never ate them. All of her friends hated lima beans, and she wanted to fit in. Camilla was always worried about what other people thought of her. Today she was fretting or worrying even more than usual. It was the first day of school, and she couldn't decide what to wear. There were so many people to impress, and impress means make someone feel good about you. She tried on 42 outfits, but none seemed quite right. She put on a pretty red dress and looked in the mirror. Then she screamed. She's always worrying about what people think of her. Well, that doesn't seem like a good way to be, right? You should not worry about what other people think, right? I wonder if that's going to get her into this trouble of the stripes. Her mother ran into the room and she screamed too. "Oh my heavens," she cried. "You're completely covered with stripes." This was certainly true. Camilla was striped from head to toe. She looked like a rainbow. Mrs. Cream felt Camilla's head. "Do you feel all right?" she asked. "I feel fine," Camilla answered. "But just look at me." "You get back in bed this instant," her mother ordered. "You're not going to school today." Camilla was relieved, which means no longer worried. She didn't want to miss the first day of school, but she was afraid of what the other kids would say, and she had no idea what to wear with those crazy stripes. So she was somewhat happy that she didn't have to go to school because she did not want the other kids to see her like this. Well, I don't think I would either. That afternoon, Dr. Bumble came to examine, or look at closely, Camilla. "Most extraordinary," or very special or unusual, he exclaimed. "I've never seen anything like it. Are you having any coughing, sneezing, runny nose, aches, pains, chills, hot flashes, or feeling suddenly hot? Dizziness, drowsiness, feeling sleepy, shortness of breath, or uncontrollable twitching," which means feeling jumpy without wanting to feel that way? "No," Camilla told him. "I feel fine." "Well then," Dr. Bumble said, turning to Mrs. Cream, "I don't see any reason why she shouldn't go to school tomorrow. There's some ointment, cream to make you feel better, that should help clear up those stripes in a few days. If it doesn't, you know where to reach me." And off he went. So he's saying, I don't see any reason why she shouldn't go to school. So I wonder if that's going to cause problems when she gets to school and she keeps changing colors. We'll have to wait and see. The next day was a disaster, which means something bad happens, like a flood. Everyone at school laughed at Camilla. They called her Camilla Crayon and Night of the Living Lollipop. She tried her best to act as if everything were normal, but when the class said the Pledge of Allegiance, her stripes turned red, white, and blue, and she broke out in stars. So now she looks kind of like a flag, doesn't she? The other kids thought this was great. One yelled out, "Let's see some purple polka dots." Sure enough, Camilla turned all purple polka dotty. Someone else shouted, "Checkerboard!" and a pattern of squares covered her skin. Soon everyone was calling out different shapes and colors, and poor Camilla was changing faster than you can change channels on a TV. Oh my goodness, look at, she's camouflaged in the stars and stripes, and she's got these checkerboards, and she's got this blue and these purple polka dots. Oh, she is just changing all the time, and everybody's laughing at her. I bet that makes her feel sad. I wonder what this has to do with lima beans. That night, Mr. Harms, the school principal, called. "I'm sorry, Miss Mrs. Cream, he said, I'm going to have to ask you to keep Camila home from school. She's just too much of a distraction. Too hard for all the kids to learn. And I've been getting calls from the other parents. They're afraid those stripes may be contagious, which means other kids might get them. Camilla was so embarrassed, felt like others would laugh at her. She couldn't believe that 2 days ago everyone liked her. Now nobody wanted to be in the same room with her. Her father tried to make her feel better. Is there anything I can get you, sweetheart? He asked. No, thank you, sighed Camilla. What she really wanted was a nice plate of lima beans, but she had been laughed at enough for one day. So she's thinking, I really would feel better if I had some lima beans, but if I ask for it, maybe people will laugh at me. Well, that's not a very good way to think, is it? Well, yes, I see. Dr. Bumble mumbled when Mr. Cream phoned the next day. I think I'd better bring in the specialist. We'll be right over. About an hour later, Dr. Bumble arrived with 4 people in long white coats. He introduced them to the Creams. This is Dr. Grop, Dr. Sponge, Dr. Cricket, and Dr. Young. Then the specialist went to work on Camilla. They squeezed and jabbed, or poked, tapped and tested. It was very uncomfortable, which means it did not feel good having all that stuff done to you. Well, it's not the mumps, concluded Dr. Grop. Or the measles, said Dr. Sponge. Definitely not chicken pox, put in Dr. Cricket. Or sunburn, said Dr. Young. Try these, said the specialist. They each handed her a bottle filled with different colored pills. Take one of each before bed, said Dr. Grop. Then they filed out the front door, followed by Dr. Bumble. That night, Camilla took her medicine. It was awful. When she woke up the next morning, she did feel different. But when she got dressed, her clothes didn't fit right. She looked in the mirror, and there, staring back at her, was a giant multicolored pill with her face on it. So when she took the pills, it made her turn into a pill-shaped little girl. How is she ever going to get out of this? It has something to do with the lima beans, but I don't know what it is. Do you? Dr. Bumble rushed over as soon as Mrs. Cream called, but this time instead of the specialist, he brought the experts, which they're about the same type of people. Dr. Gord and Mr. Mellon were the finest scientific minds, which means that they were very, very smart, in the land. Once again, Camilla was poked and prodded, looked at, and listened to. The experts wrote down lots of numbers. Then they huddled together and whispered. Dr. Gord finally spoke. It might be a virus, which is a very, very small living thing that makes people sick. He announced with authority, which means he said it in a way that made him believable, or that you could believe what he said. Suddenly, fuzzy little virus balls appeared all over Camilla. Or possibly some form of bacteria. And a bacteria is another very small living thing that may or may not make you sick, said Mr. Mellon. Out popped squiggly little bacteria tails. Or it could be a fungus. A fungus is a plant-like living thing that may look like mold or even a mushroom, said Dr. Gord. Instantly, Camilla was covered with different colored fungus blotches. The experts looked at Camilla, then at each other. We need to go over these numbers again back at the lab, Dr. Gord explained. We'll call you when we know something. But the experts didn't have a clue, much less a cure. So the experts didn't know what was going on with Camilla, and they didn't know what to do about it either. By now, the TV news had found out about Camilla. Reporters from every channel were outside her house telling the story of the bizarre, strange or unusual, case of the incredible changing kid. Soon a huge crowd was camped out on the front lawn, so they're all just hanging around there trying to get a picture or take a video of Camilla with her color changing. Oh, boy, that would just make me really nervous, wouldn't you? The creams were swamped with, had many suggestions, all kinds of remedies or ways to make you feel better, like medicine. From psychologists, people who help you with your feelings, allergists, people who help you with things that you're allergic to, herbalists, people who use plants to make you feel better, nutritionists, a person who tells you what you should eat to be healthy, psychics, someone who claims to predict the future, an old medicine man, a kind of a doctor, a guru, someone who is supposed to be an expert or very smart, and even a veterinarian. Each so-called cure only added to poor Camilla's strange appearance until it was hard to even recognize her. She sprouted or grew out roots and berries and crystals and feathers and a long furry tail, but nothing worked. And there she is. Has a tail and sprouts and feathers and different colors. She's a mess, isn't she? Oh, I hope she gets better. One day, a woman who called herself an environmental therapist claimed she could cure Camilla. Close your eyes, she said. Breathe deeply and become one with your room, which means feel relaxed and calm in your room. I wish you hadn't said that, Camilla groaned. Slowly she started to melt into the walls of her room. Her bed became her mouth, her nose was a dresser, and two paintings were her eyes. The therapist screamed and ran from the house. What are we going to do? Cried Mrs. Cream. It just keeps getting worse and worse. She began to sob, which means cry noisily. At that moment, Mr. Cream heard a quiet little knock at the front door. He opened it, and there stood an old woman who was just as plump or rounded and sweet as a strawberry. Excuse me, she said brightly in a happy way, but I think I can help. She went into Camilla's room and looked around. My goodness, she said with a shake of her head. What we have here is a bad case of stripes, one of the worst I've ever seen. She pulled a container of small green beans from her bag. Here, she said, these might do the trick. Are those magic beans? Asked Mrs. Cream. Oh, my, no, replied the kind old woman. There's no such thing. These are just plain old lima beans. I'll bet you'd like some, wouldn't you? She asked Camilla. Camilla wanted a big, heaping plateful of lima beans more than just about anything, but she was still afraid to admit it. Yuck, she said. No one likes lima beans, especially me. Oh, dear, the old woman said sadly. I guess I was wrong about you. She put the beans back in her bag and started towards the door. Camilla watched the old woman walk away. Those beans would taste so good, and being laughed at for eating them was nothing compared to what she'd been through. She finally couldn't stand it. Wait, she cried. The truth is, I really love lima beans. I thought so, the old woman said with a smile. She took a handful of beans and popped them into Camilla's mouth. Mmm, said Camilla. So she finally decides that eating lima beans in front of other people is not a something that she should be worried about, right? Because after being so embarrassed by changing to all those colors and sprouting branches and fungus and all those other nasty things, that eating some lima beans in front of somebody else is nothing, right? Suddenly the branches, feathers, and squiggly tails began to disappear. Then the whole room swirled around. When it stopped, there stood Camilla, and everything was back to normal. "I'm cured," she shouted. "Yes," said the old woman. "I knew the real you was in there somewhere." She patted Camilla on the head. Then she went outside and vanished into the crowd. So Camilla really just had to accept herself for who she was and not try to worry about what other people thought of her. And because she liked lima beans and other people didn't like lima beans, that was no reason not to eat lima beans and be herself. Afterward, Camilla wasn't quite the same. Some of the kids at school said she was weird, but she didn't care a bit. She ate all the lima beans she wanted, and she never had even a touch of stripes again.